Chapter 10 Tools. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Eisen looked down into his hands at the hammer he was holding. It took a few hours to create, most of which was the tempering process, but the final item was something Eisen was truly happy with. High quality cross, peen hammer, quality. Perfect, rank. 2. Description, an extremely high quality hammer created by the blacksmith Eisen. Due to the quality and hardness, even high-tier metals can be forged without issues. Effect, +4 STR, +4 END. It truly wasn't very hard to create the hammer, and it went significantly faster than the knife the day before. In the beginning, he had the cylindrical ingot and first punched a hole through it so that it would be easier to handle during the rest of the forging and so that he could insert the wooden handle easily as well. After the hole went completely through the ingot, Eisen inserted a square metal staff and set the ingot down on the anvil, so that the staff would basically be parallel to the anvil's surface, and began flattening the center area of the top and bottom surfaces. Following this, he thinned out the area between the center area and the two ends. He punched two parts off one of the ends and formed it into a wedge shape. Eisen then proceeded by cooling the hot steel in a tub of water, followed by tempering it in the same brick box as he built yesterday. While he was then heading to the workshop to start working on the handle, he was thinking about whether or not it would be a good idea to advise Denmir to get some kind of oven specifically meant for tempering. As far as he noticed, none of them did anything like Eisen and didn't attempt tempering at all. Why the developers chose to leave it out of general blacksmithing practices of NPCs was unknown to him, but Eisen guessed that they wanted to somehow give players that do the effort to learn about actual blacksmithing an advantage. He would need to find out if that was the case for other crafts as well, although they aren't necessarily as complicated and include as many techniques as blacksmithing does, so he really wasn't sure. He made the handle for the hammer out of the same material as for the knife, to kind of get a theme going. Eisen looked at the hammer in his hands and felt its weight. Compared to the hammer he was using before, this one seemed to be absolutely perfect for him, as his hand fit perfectly around the handle, and even without using tool connection, it felt like the hammer was part of his body. Exactly because of that, Eisen felt like tool connection would have a great effect. He concentrated and closed his eyes, feeling this foreign energy, mana, spread from inside his body into the hammer. When he felt that the skill activated, he opened the item information and looked at the line displayed at the end. Connection, rank 1, 4%. He was surprised and happy about the connection ranking at the same time. Until now, the immediate connection was always only in the rank 0 territory, and apparently, his skill level also increased by 5 levels at once. Ah, old timer. Ye made a hammer for yourself, eh? At least ye didn't lose your dwarf spirit when ye lost your memories, ha ha ha. While Eisen was looking down at his tool, Denmir walked up behind him and eyed the hammer with curiosity. However, since he had work to do himself, the dwarf decided to walk off to his own forge on the other side of the room, but before he managed to walk more than 2 or 3 steps, Eisen stopped him. What do you mean? I just made this for convenience. The hammers you have here feel slightly off. Denmir crossed his arms and nodded his head. Of course they do. The tools I let ya and my apprentices use are all made by me. Whenever someone creates a tool of any kind, no matter the quality or how much it actually fits to them, that item will feel more perfect than anything someone else can give them. And what I meant. It's a tradition for dwarves to make their own tools when they stop being an apprentice. Many simply stop doing that, but here at the Dwarf's Delight, I still have my apprentices do it. And ye obviously earned the right for it, old timer. The dwarf explained with a happy grin on his face, and then turned and left to get to his work. Glad that he found out a little bit of history behind dwarves, Eisen brought back the hammer he had been using until now and leaned against the wall to think about his next step. There weren't that many basic tools he would need that he could think of. Leatherworking and tailoring mainly needed 2 tools. A thin, sharp knife to cut the material as well as needles. He could use the knife he made the day before, but he decided he should make a new one for 2 reasons. First, cutting materials like leather or fabric tend to dull knives quickly. Second, Eisen felt like using an item for one purpose had some kind of effect. And not only in the game but in real life as well. Even if he wasn't working in a smithy for months at a time when traveling around the world, the moment he picked up his hammer, it felt like not even a second passed since the last time, and it seemed as if all he ever did during every second of his life was swing his hammer. But then he could pick up the knife he would use for cooking every night, and it seemed like he never did anything else. To Eisen, having a tool for everything gave them a purpose, a reason to be there. And who doesn't want that? So even if it would end up being an exact duplicate of the knife he created yesterday, he decided to make a new one. And besides leatherwork and tailoring, Eisen decided to make some other tools as well. Since he was the original of the mechanical arts, he would need to be capable in 7 categories: tailoring, agriculture, masonry, hunting, trade, cooking and blacksmithing. Thus, he still needed tools for agriculture and hunting, since masonry and trade didn't really require any specific tools. Eisen decided that he would first create something for tailoring. He would need something that he can either easily make in large batches or something that wouldn't dull easily. However, since the hardest and resilient material he had access to was steel, the first option was the better of the two until he can use higher-tier metals. After thinking for a while, he decided to create an X-Acto knife with exchangeable blades. Although this would create the problem of needing to manually make blades that would have to be practically identical to each other. Before he started worrying about that too much, though, he simply got to work. He chose to give the knife a wooden base with steel blades, as well as a small wooden container to properly store the blades if he needed them in the future, since he couldn't have them lying loosely in his pocket. Eisen retrieved a few small pieces of steel from the storage and placed them inside one of the foundries. While the steel was melting down, he grabbed a cast made specifically to create thin sheets of metal. After pouring the molten steel into the cast, and waiting for it to cool down a little bit, Eisen began punching small triangles not bigger than his distal phalanx, the part of his finger furthest from his palm, out of the sheet with the help of a thin chisel. He got as many as he could out of the small sheet, which ended up amounting to 50, a number that should last him a while. Once the blades were shaped, he quickly placed them into water to cool them all, and placed them away to temper, although for only 1 hour instead of 2. When the blades were tempering, Eisen once more got to carving the handle. He simply made a thin stick that would lay in his hand comfortable, shaped so that he had a good grip on it no matter what he wanted to do. In the front, he added a thin slit for the blades to slide into and took some time to create a small lock that would keep the blade in place. Since he still had time left before the tempering would be over, Eisen grabbed 2 small blocks of wood, one just a few centimeters wider into each dimension than the other. He cut off a thin sheet off the bigger of the 2 blocks and emptied the rest out, making it a hollow cube with one side left open, so that the smaller could fit perfectly inside. He then cut the smaller block into 5 3-centimeter thick sheets, carving small fittings the size and shape of the blades into each one so that he could place about 10 of them into each sheet. Then, he carved a little ledge into each sheet so that he could pull them out easily. Before he could finish off the box, he went and grabbed the blades so that they wouldn't be in there too long, and let them air cool for a short bit. Eisen just quickly went to one of the finest grinding stones and made sure the blades had as sharp an edge as possible. He got a few completion notifications but waited to read them through until all were finished, and he put the first blade into the handle. Small knife with exchangeable blade, quality. Perfect, rank. 1. Description: a sharp knife created to cut fabrics and leather. The blade is exchangeable. Small blade, quality. Perfect, rank. 1. Description: a small blade to be inserted into a grip. Doesn't last long, but cuts sharp. Eisen looked at the notifications and nodded. He hadn't expected this item to be a rank 2 as well, since these were just blades meant to be thrown away at some point, and he only punched them out of a basic sheet, which didn't require much effort. Lastly, Eisen placed his attention back onto the box, and finally put the sheet he cut off the bigger block earlier back onto the box using some rough wooden hinges and another small lock. Just when he placed the small box down and looked at it, he got a surprising notification. You created a small storage box, woodworking skill learned. Oh. But I didn't get that skill from simply making the handles. Is it because I made them for an item connected to blacksmithing? Eisen wondered and grabbed the box, twisting it around a little bit. Sure, it was alright when considering he made it in just about half an hour, but he also didn't really put any effort into it. He knew he could do better, but at the moment that wasn't his priority, but he still inspected the item's description curiously. Small storage box, quality. Perfect, rank. 0, description, a small box meant to hold a number of the same item. Storable, small blade, capacity, 50. Eisen was greatly satisfied, even though the quality was low since he didn't even expect this to count as an independent item. He was even happier after thinking about what he could do with his new woodworking skill. Slowly, he placed all the blades into the box and then put it into his pocket, so that he can start his next project. The next thing he would now make are needles he would need for sewing at some point. For whatever reason, Eisen always had the habit of losing his needles or bending them in some unnatural way, so he thought he better make more than one. Eisen grabbed a small ingot of steel and placed it into the forge. Once it began glowing a bright orange, he took the ingot out and chipped a little piece off of it. Carefully, he slowly formed it into the shape of a needle by giving it many light but precise blows. Lastly, he took a small sharp chisel and created a small hole at one of the ends. Eisen repeated this until he had 20 needles finished. It wasn't a hard process, just annoying to go through since it took some time and it was hard to handle the small, hot piece of metal. Again, Eisen placed the needles into the brick box to temper them and went to the workshop to make something that can hold them while he doesn't need them. And after about 30 minutes, the box and the needles were finished. Sewing needle, quality. Perfect, rank. 1, description, a simple sewing needle. Small storage box, quality. Perfect, rank. 0, description, a small box meant to hold a number of the same item. Storable, sewing needle, capacity, 25. Chapter 11 Mana. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Just like the day before, Eisen left the smithy together with Denmir while talking about this and that. I'll see you tomorrow, old timer. The dwarf waved at Eisen while he was walking away, back up the slope with his new items. He couldn't just leave them lying around somewhere, but it was also a hassle to carry them with him all the time. Thus, he decided on two things. First, Eisen would create a weapon tomorrow as well as a small box for his cooking knife so that it wouldn't be just loosely lying in his pocket or cut up his pants fabric. Second, after creating the weapon he would go on to learn tailoring and hopefully manage to create a simple bag the same day, and maybe some clothes as well. Sure, the ones he was wearing at the time fit him perfectly, but because of the fabric they were made of were pretty uncomfortable in the long run. Not to speak of the fact that he has been wearing them for about 3 in-game days now. And because of the game's realism, they were slowly getting dirtier and dirtier. Whatever the case may be, for now, Eisen decided to meet with Moram and see how he was doing, and maybe ask him where he could find Belrim to also thank him for being such a big help when he first arrived in Melro. Eisen made his way to Everything Magic, Moram's magic-related shop, and stepped through the door. Hey, Moram. Are you here? Eisen yelled when he noticed the store's front was empty and walked over to the door leading to the back. Before he could even open it, the door opened on its own and a young man with messy black hair stepped through. Moram was wearing some kind of goggles and his face were covered in pitch-black soot. Yeah. Did something happen? He asked, turning his head to look around. Did I work until the middle of the night again? Why's it so dark? Eisen sighed out loud and looked down at Moram. No, Moram, it's still day. The sun is setting, but it's still day. Ha! Eisen. Wait, if it's not night. Did I go blind through my experiments? Not again. Moram, your goggles are dirty. Just take them off. Also. Again. Completely ignoring Aizen's question, Moram stopped moving as if petrified and his face flushed a deep red. Slowly, he raised his hands and pulled the goggles off his face, hanging them around his neck. Sorry, well, Aizen, nice to see you again. What brings you here? Moram asked, slowly wiping the soot off his face. In response, Aizen scratched his beard and smiled, well, there's one reason. For now, how I told you the other day, I just want to learn different crafts, but after that, I wanted to see if I could learn magic-related things. You seem to be selling a lot of different items made with it, right? Ah, of course. How the name of my shop implies, I'm selling pretty much every type of item that has to do with magic. I enchant items, make alchemical potions, and also try to see how I can implement direct magic into items. That's actually what I was just doing. I kinda lost control when trying to implement the explosive qualities of a fireball into an arrowhead. Aizen widened his eyes in surprise, already thinking of what could be possible when combining magic with items. Sounds interesting. If you don't mind, I would like you to show me how to do those things in a few days, maybe in a week. The half-dwarf half-elf simply nodded with a smile on his face, of course. Seems like fun finally having someone with me here. There are not that many people in this town that are interested in magic as much as I am. Heh. Moram chuckled softly and scratched the back of his head, his smile widening, and then looks back up at Aizen, but do you know how to use mana already? Aizen simply shook his head, no, and that's why I came a week in advance. I wanted to see if you have something for me to read up on. Crafting is in my body, and I just know how to use it, but this mana just seems too foreign. I would like to practice a bit beforehand. With a smirk, Moram's ears began to twitch back and forth a slight bit and he moved forward toward one of the bookshelves standing at the side of the room. He looked through a few of them and shook his head until he pulled one of them out and brought it out to Aizen. The book was neatly leather-bound and grandly decorated with golden stitches running across it like a frame. After blowing some dust off of it in a very cliché way, Moram began explaining. This is a book that explains the process of mana manipulation, as well as a bunch of basic training methods. It would be easier to teach you by showing you, but since you don't seem to have the time for that, this is your best bet for now. Aizen nodded his head and grabbed the book, flipping through it. On a few pages there seemed to be illustrations, although most of it was written text. Thank you, Moram. This will be a great help. Do you want to go for dinner at the inn again? Aizen asked with a smile, but Moram only shook his head. Sorry, I would love to, but I need to continue my work for now. The only way I can run this place is through investors at the moment, and if I don't regularly show them new creations they'll stop funding me. So I need to finish that exploding arrow, or else I'm done for. I'll tell you when I have time, and this time it's on me. Ha, I like the way you think. Aizen laughed loudly and slapped Moram on the back. I guess I'll leave now then so you can continue working. Ah, do you know where I can meet Belrim? Usually, around this time he's down at the mine, working the night shift. You might meet him at a bar in the morning. Usually, he goes to the one in your inn. Thank you. I'll see you around. With a smile, Aizen stepped out of the shop and decided to make his way to the inn so that he can begin reading up on mana manipulation. After eating dinner, he paid for his room and made his way up there. Aizen placed his storage boxes, knife, coin-bag, as well as the introduction booklet he got from Ari onto the nightstand and sat down on the bed with his new book. Aizen flipped it open onto the first page and immediately began reading. The introduction mainly explained what mana actually is, and how important it is for any living being's body. Since this was pretty similar to the concept of, for example, ki, which Aizen learned about while traveling Asia, he understood this easily. According to this book, mana can also be described as life force, something that flows within anyone's body as if it was their blood. Since mana is a type of energy, it can be expulsed from one's body, potentially creating the phenomenon called magic. However, if one wanted to do this, they had to have control over their mana, which is not something easy to do. Ednel.co. The rest of the introduction spoke about famous magicians of the past, especially about the first person that discovered magic, although they were mentioned as if common knowledge, so Eisen couldn't really find out many details about them. Thus, he simply moved on. The first real chapter explained how someone should feel the mana within them. It was described as hot energy filling out their whole body at times, while at other times it was focused onto a single spot, moving along with the flow of someone's energy. After Moram used magic on his body, he kept feeling this energy all the time, so he wasn't worried about that. This was the only way he was able to pretty much instantly get the tool connection skill, after all. Then, in the second chapter, there was an explanation on how to control this mana. The first exercise was to change how it acted within his body. Change it back and forth from filling his whole body, and then being compressed as much as possible. As a follow-up, he was supposed to move the compressed mana through his body. Eisen decided to test this out and concentrated. He closed his eyes and took deep breaths, trying to feel his mana inside of him, filling out every part of his body. When he felt like he had a grasp on the consistency of this energy, he imagined an invisible border forming at the place of his skin, slowly moving further inside of himself, shrinking constantly. Once he got to his limit of compressing his mana, there was a tiny copy of Eisen made out of pure mana inside of him. But since the exercise said to form it into a sphere, he tried to slowly change its shape into one. The mana, now in the shape of a perfect sphere, was pushed toward Eisen's right hand, now basically sitting directly underneath his palm. Slowly, trying not to lose grasp of his control, he opened his eyes so that he could continue reading the next step. Mana expulsion. Following the instructions, Eisen concentrated further on the mana sphere, slowly pushing it through his skin like it was a thin membrane. At first, it stung, and Eisen had to grit his teeth so that he wouldn't lose concentration, but after a short, while he felt a part of the mana under his palm exit, while the rest instantly exploded out, filling his body out once more. Mana manipulation skill learned. Immediately, Eisen opened his eyes, looking at the round, tiny sphere of glowing white light. Oh ho! This tiny thing looks interesting. Eisen muttered out and kept concentrating on the sphere. He felt it and compared it to the mana still inside of his body. Mana that kept swirling around his body, wrapped around every part of him. His brain, lungs, blood vessels, up to his heart, that was beating slowly and calmly. Then, a change happened in the sphere of mana hovering above his hand. Slowly, it began pulsing in the pace of his heartbeat, expanding and retracting a little bit each time. He felt his life as part of this energy, and this energy as part of his life, of this new body inside of this game. You feel your mana pulse with life. +1 INT, however, surprised by this sudden notification, Eisen lost his concentration and all of the mana that made up the sphere instantly dissipated. Eisen didn't mind, though, since he decided this would be a good time to end his practice for the day. For whatever reason, he felt extremely tired after manipulating his mana. He only realized why when he opened his status for a second. Eisen, race. Giant, dwarf halfling, occupation. None, level. 4 HP. 210 MP. 20/150 STR. 19 End. 18 AGI. 16 Int. 12 Wis. 12 Titles, Original of the Mechanical Arts, Limit Breaker, Skills, A Dwarf's Hands, Rank. 0, Level. 1, A Giant's Strength, Rank. 0, Level. 1, Appraisal, Rank. 0, Level. 99, Blacksmithing, Rank. 1, Level. 36, Mana Manipulation, Rank. 0, Level. 4, Tool Connection, Rank. 0, Level. 91, Woodworking, Rank. 0, level 29. It seemed like during this short practice, just by creating this tiny sphere, Aizen expended nearly all of his mana. Glad to know what would happen if his MP neared 0, and annoyed that this is the limit of what he could do, Aizen unclothed and laid down in bed to sleep. Chapter 12 Fake. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Aizen woke up in the morning, his MP now filled again after his exercise the day before nearly depleted it. He stood up and got dressed, placing all of his items into his pocket. After then bringing the keys back to the reception, he sat down in the restaurant and ordered breakfast, the same as the day before. The young, pink-haired waitress he met the other day was working again, and Aizen kept wondering if she wasn't too young to work. However, since he didn't know how stuff like that was managed in this world, he ignored it and treated her like any other waitress. After breakfast, since Denmir shouldn't be at his shop around this time yet, Aizen thought he would look for Belrim. He stood up from his table after paying and walked to the bar. He didn't expect anyone to actually be there at this time, but there were a number of people, most of which were dwarves with dirt covering their arms and faces. There was one relatively large group sat in the corner, centered around the one human in the group. He had short black hair and a cleanly shaven face and kept smiling smugly while talking to the rest of the group. But Aizen ignored them, despite the loud conversations and laughter coming from that corner, and walked over to the actual bar where he saw the man he was looking for. "Good morning, Belrim," Aizen exclaimed and placed his hand on his shoulder while sitting down next to him, and the dwarf quickly turned around in surprise. "Ah, Gramps. So how'd it gone at Moram's place the other day? Got your memories or skills back?" he asked and began to smile with the jug of beer in his hand. "Well, I got my racial skills and a title back at least, but other than that nothing. But I still wanted to thank you. Without you, I wouldn't have even known I could have those skills, to begin with." Aizen smiled happily, and Belrim began to laugh. "That's better than nothing. And if you wanna thank me, buy me a drink, you old geezer." Aizen laughed lowly and waved over the barkeeper, and ordered another beer for Belrim. "Yuri a good guy, Gramps." Belrim laughed out and downed the beer he had standing in front of him in one go, and his jug was swapped out with one that was filled. Belrim and Aizen continued talking for a while, simply about smaller stuff. During that conversation, he found out the importance of the mine under the town. It is at that spot where two huge veins of iron and mithril intersect. Since Aizen didn't know what mithril was, he had Belrim explain it to him. It's a metal with a silver color, and it's incredibly light but strong at the same time, which was only made possible through the influence of mana that is naturally attracted to the metal. While the two of them were talking about the general uses of mithril, a loud noise interrupted their conversation. Immediately, Aizen turned around to the source of the noise and saw the pink-haired waitress standing there in front of the group in the corner, picking up a few jugs that were thrown on the ground. Since the restaurant and bar were a joint business, it seemed like the waitresses from the restaurant also worked at the bar when necessary. Trying to figure out what happened, Aizen kept his eyes there suspiciously. "That's right, pick those up, you fake," the human of the group yelled out, laughing with a vile face. The other men and women around him laughed as well and looked at her with despising looks. When he noticed this as well, Belrim simply grunted and continued drinking his beer. "Damn Hendrik. What do you mean? What's going on?" Aizen asked confused, a frown on his face. Belrim sighed loudly and began to explain, "That girl over there is a Fey, kin. Ye can see that from her bright pink hair and long ears. Normally people don't have that, you know. There's a stigma against Fays, which is completely idiotic. Many people say Fays are more monsters than anything else, so if there's a half-Fey, they aren't easily accepted, hence people call them fake, 'cause it sounds like Fey, kin and means she's a fake person. Pricks like Hendrik use that to look cool in front of others. We can't let him bully a little kid." Aizen said angrily and prepared to stand up, but Belrim quickly stopped him with a laugh. "Heh, little kid. Gramps, Fey, kin age slowly. She's about as old as Moram. Eisen stared blankly at Belrim, unsure what to say. It was confusing to him since she looked basically as old as his youngest granddaughter, but she was supposed to be double as old as that. He decided to let it be for now. She was an adult, so she should be able to handle name-calling. Stepping in would probably only hurt her more. Eisen wanted to simply ignore it, but then. Hey, fake, how about you stop being so useless and instead come with me? The human, Hendrik, stood up and grabbed the girl by her arm, pulling her upward. You've got a cute face. You might be worth a copper or two at the underground market. Please, sir customer, let go of my hand. I need to get back to my work. Hendrik's face twisted in disgust as he was looking down on the girl and gripped her arm harder so that she was visibly in pain, and raised his other hand. How dare you talk back to me? Don't you know who I am? He shot his hand downward, and just when his palm was about to connect with her face, he felt a sharp pain in its center. With his hand bleeding, he let go of the girl and inspected what the item in his hand was. Shocked and confused, he simply stared down, until a big hand covered in scars slowly pulled out the thin needle. He turned to the source of the hand and turned his head upward, looking at the face of an old man with a body completely contradictory to it. The fuck do you think you're doing? Hendrik yelled out and held his hand in pain. That's what I was about to ask, kid. Eisen said, his eyes focused on Hendrik and his expression calm, hiding a storm of anger behind it. What do you think gives you the right to treat another person like that? Hendrik's group was completely quiet while looking at the man in front of them, while Hendrik himself began slowly stumbling backward, his grin widening as he let out a soft chuckle. What person could you be talking about? All I did was do what any proper citizen should do. It's disgusting enough that a fake is even allowed to work here. Having a fake talk to their customers, seems like the owner here truly is an idiot, huh? He laughed out and the rest of the group began to have mixed emotions. Some joined Hendrik in his laughter, while others looked angrily at the Fey, Kin and the owner acting as the barkeeper during this time. Eisen turned to look at the owner, whose face became angrier the more he looked at Hendrik, but simply said nothing for some reason, and then turned back to the human in front of him. Alright, kid, that was the last straw. He muttered out lowly and grabbed Hendrik by the collar, slightly pulling him up by it. Sure, his strength was still not what it is in real life, but it was enough to pick up such a scrawny-looking man. Stop right there. What do you think you're doing? You don't know who I am, do you? No, I don't. Should I care? Of course you should. I'm Hendrik Argon. A rank 4 adventurer. You can be happy I'm even here in this measly town. Eisen clicked his tongue and gripped his collar more tightly, but let go when he saw the Fey, Kin girl have a conflicted look on her face as if she was about to try and stop. Listen here, kid. I don't care about who you are and all that adventurer nonsense. Just stop treating another person like that. Or you'll regret it. Is that supposed to be a threat? What's your level, huh? 10, 20. Like anyone else's in this measly town. I'm level 50, so try and see what you can do against me. Hendrik began to laugh like a maniac at Eisen, who sighed and turned around. Oi, you think you can just leave? After you disrespected me like that? No way. He yelled out and grabbed Eisen's arm, stopping him in his track. While Eisen wouldn't want to admit it, but Hendrik really was way stronger than Eisen. The job I'm here for is gonna last a week, so it's going to trouble me if I kill anyone for now, but after that. You know what I'm saying, right? Baring his teeth, Hendrik looked up at Eisen and continued, in 7 days, you'll fight me. And then we'll see who's in the right. In 1 week, down at the entrances to the mine. New quest. Hendrik's duel, description, after defending a Fey, Kin from Hendrik, he felt offended and requested a duel. You don't know what's to gain or to lose from this. Requirements, fight against Hendrik in 7 days at the mines, reward. Failure. Time limit. 1 week, until then, don't bother anyone. With that, Eisen ended the conversation and left the bar, with Belrim laughing in the background and a concerned Kin following behind him closely. Please, wait. The pink-haired girl yelled out at Eisen, who decided to make his way to the smithy to create his weapon. He was greatly agitated through the conversation with Hendrik right then and needed to let loose of some steam. Because of that, he didn't even notice her when she was trying to stop him by grabbing his arm and simply kept on walking forward. Only when he arrived at the shop's door was when he actually did. He scratched his beard and closed his eyes, releasing a soft smile. Sorry. I hope I didn't mess anything up for you back there. I didn't want to get you in trouble or anything. Immediately the girl crossed her arms in front of her face. No, you didn't. I'm the one that should thank you, and also apologize. Thank you for helping me, but... Sorry, you have to fight him because of me. Don't worry, kid. I'm fine. A brat like him can't beat me. He laughed out loud and flexed his arm as if to show off how strong he was. Of course, he knew that his body didn't matter in this world, but he also knew that his kids and grandchildren always had to laugh when he did this, and he felt like she could use a good laugh. But opposite to his expectations, her eyes began to glitter. Really? So you're stronger than him? Of course I am, little lady. Now, don't you think you should go back to the inn? You still have to work, right? The girl shook her head with a smile. Nope. Those guys would have been the last order I was going to take for the day. Also, my name is Bree. And what is your name, mister? Bree asked with an innocent smile. I'm Eisen, nice to meet you, Bree. Eisen shook Bree's hand, and then explained that he was going to enter the shop now since he wanted to make something in the smithy. He expected her to leave but instead asked for a favor. Eisen, could I maybe watch? You want to watch me? Eisen asked surprised, and Bree quickly nodded, yes, please. And maybe I could even help you. I can bring you whatever you need, and I can make the fire hotter. Eisen looked down at the girl fidgeting with her hands and began to laugh. Sure, come on in. Just try to stick to me and don't wander around too much. Bree's nervousness immediately turned into happiness and she followed Eisen inside. Good morning, old timer. What are your plans for today? Oh, and is that Bree behind you? Denmir asked and smiled at her while Eisen and Bree were walking through the door to the smithy. Eisen greeted him and did some small talk amongst other things, telling him that it would be the last day he would be there for a while. Denmir was sad to hear it, but he understood. Well, then I hope you're gonna come back soon. If you ever need to make a quick buck, ye can help me out around the shop and make some weapons for us. Thanks for that, Denmir. I'll remember that. With a smile, Eisen continued on toward the storage space, picking out what materials he would need today. With a grin on his face and part of his agitation already dwindling because of the cheerful Bree, Eisen got his hammer out of his pocket and smiled. Chapter 13 Sword. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen walked over to the foundry and threw a few of the ingots he got in there to melt them down. After about 5 minutes, the once hard steel turned into a bright yellow liquid version of itself, and Eisen slowly poured it into a mold to basically just make a slightly bigger ingot out of it. Using his tongs, he brought the still hot ingot over to the anvil so that he wouldn't lose time. He used tool connection on his hammer and began to draw the steel out to make it longer. It was when the steel neared the basic shape of a blade that he had an idea. Yesterday during his practice he managed to force mana out of his body. He didn't know much about classic game worlds, but Eisen at the very least researched a little bit into types of weapons common in fantasy worlds and found one interesting thing. Magic weapons. There wasn't much info about how these are made, but Eisen did have an idea of how the developers of this game might have chosen to handle this concept. By imbuing mana into what you are forging. Slowly, Aizen began concentrating and compressed his mana inside of him. This alone was already far easier than last night, and Aizen figured this was simply because of his new mana manipulation skill helping him out. He concentrated on his mana and formed it into a small sphere before moving it through his arm into his hand, and then into his hammer. Slowly, he turned the sphere into a thin, round sheet the size of the hammer's flat front surface, gently pushing it through the metal so that it covered the front of his hammer. So that he could keep up his concentration and not lose control of his mana, he slightly slowed down the pace of his hammering, but with every hit, Aizen noticed the spot where his hammer connected with the hot steel turning from a bright orange into a bright white for a split second before turning back orange. Aizen, are you using magic? Bree asked curiously and leaned in closer toward the anvil, intensely studying what Aizen was doing. With a soft laugh, while trying to concentrate on the task at hand, Aizen nodded. Yes, I'm trying to imbue mana into the metal. But I'm running low. Frowning, Aizen noticed that his mana was lowered by about 5 MP every time he hit the metal, and since his total MP was only 150, it wouldn't hold for very long. From the corner of his eye, he noticed that Bree was fidgeting around slightly as if she wanted to say something. Aizen couldn't help but laugh a little bit and told Bree to just say what she wanted to say. So, I'm pretty good at support magic, and one of them is mana transfer. Since I'm a Fey kin, my mana pool is a lot bigger than that of other races, although I can't use attack magic. But if you want, I can give you some of my mana until you're done. She smiled happily and looked at Aizen with a smile. After considering it for a few seconds, Aizen agreed. That would be a great help, little lady. But if you run too low on your mana, just stop. Okay. Smiling brightly, Bree held both her hands out forward and closed her eyes. Shortly afterward, he felt warm energy enter his back that was instantly sucked toward the spot where Aizen had concentrated his mana toward. He checked his status and noticed his MP instantly fill up again, constantly staying at 150. With a grin on his face and not trying to conserve his mana anymore, he continued forging his weapon. After about an hour, the basic shape of the sword was achieved, and only 2 small lumps were left near the part dedicated to the hilt. Slowly Aizen began to shape the 2 lumps into 2 hooks by the side of the blade with the help of a thin staff that he used to help in shaping them. He then told Bree to stop giving him mana and she opened her eyes happily, skipping over to Aizen's side to look at the forged product. I don't know if using mana actually did anything, but thanks for your help anyway, Bree. Aizen said with a smile and placed his big hand onto the top of her head as he brought the 1.5 meter long sword over to the tub of water to cool it down. Even though it was about the same length as the sword Aizen had to help Denmir with, Aizen's blade was way thinner in comparison, and thus a lot lighter. With Bree's curious eyes constantly following him with his every step, Aizen began to carefully grind his Soon.to.be weapon. First, he removed all uneven parts of the metal and then helped the sides all around get into a proper edge shape. With a file, he then ground down the hooks all around to make sure they are as sharp as the rest of the edges. After the groundwork was then finished, Aizen built a slightly larger version of the tempering box he used the past few days as well and threw some of the coals from the foundry into it. Carefully he placed the blade into the box and covered it up, then moved on to the next item at hand. While for his other items he used a simple wooden grip, this time he would use a combination of steel, for the protective part of the hilt and then wood for the grip. Once he got into leatherworking he would probably also tightly wrap the grip in leather, but for now, a wooden grip would be enough. Aizen grabbed another small steel ingot and threw it into the forge to heat it up, and after a few minutes took it out with his tongs. He asked Bree to give him a bit of mana again if possible, and she happily agreed. He turned the ingot into a thin staff with its middle thicker than the rest and then began twisting it to create a swirl into the rod. After that, Aizen used another rod as help to twist both ends into circles. At last, the final step to completion of this part, he turned the rod into a half-dot circle shape, before punching a hole into its center to help put it onto the sword. He quickly quenched it in cold water and placed it into the box together with the blade. "And what are you going to do now, Eisen?" Bree asked curiously and followed Eisen into the workshop. He grabbed the same hard, resilient, but still pretty wood with its dark color and began to carve it into shape so that it would sit perfectly in his hand, and then drilled a hole into its front to help put it onto the blade. Once he knew he was now finished and only had to put the final sword together, he sighed out loud and looked at Bree, smiling brightly. "Thanks for your help, Bree. If you want, you can always come along and help me out a little." "Of course. I'd love to help you out," she replied happily and continued watching Eisen as he grabbed another flat cuboid of wood. He cut it in half horizontally and simply began carving out parts of one of the halves, using his knife as a reference. After all, now he would be making the storage box for his knife. Since that was basically it and it was only supposed to be a rough box with not much to it, he carved a simple slide-in mechanism into the two halves, so that he could slit the lid on top of it and then it would be closed shut perfectly when he closed the wooden lock, which he added next. Small storage box, quality. Perfect, rank 0, description, a small box meant to hold a single item. Storable, high-quality knife. Happy with this simple box, Eisen grabbed his knife and placed it into the box, then slid the lid onto it and closed it using the lid. Directly after that, Eisen and Bree walked out of the workshop and into the main part of the smithy. "Denmir. So, how I told you, today's my last day. So I wanted to pay you for the materials that I used," Eisen explained when he walked up to Denmir, who was taking a short break after finishing a small dagger to put into his shop out front. "Alright, just a second." Denmir nodded and walked to the storefront, then came back out a few seconds later with a small notebook in his hand. "Can I see the items you made? You've got them with ya, right?" he asked, and Eisen nodded his head. Out of his pocket, he took the knife in its new box, the hammer and the two storage boxes filled with his needles and small blades, and showed him the items that are still tempering in the brick box. After taking a few notes, Denmir sighed and looked back up at Eisen, to confirm the amount. "That's all ye used? If so, that'll be 47 silver and 30 copper. Eisen nodded and took out the 1 gold coin he had, handing it over to Denmir. He returned to the storefront and then brought back exactly 52 silver and 70 copper for Eisen, that would now slowly make his coin bag a little bit heavier. "So, now that that's dealt with. What's that sword you're makin'? Never seen a sword with hooks like that," Denmir said with a curious glitter in his eyes when thinking back on the blade he saw lying in the brick box. Eisen laughed and began scratching his beard and closed his eyes. "Ah, that's called a Zweihander. And those hooks are made for parrying. Let's say someone attacks me. If I manage to block the attack, I might be able to let the other person's blade slide toward the hooks, giving me the advantage that I can easily control the movement of the other person's sword," he explained, both Denmir and Bree listening with absolute attention. But how do you know of this weapon, old timer? Did you get back some of your memories?" Denmir blurted out and looked at Eisen curiously. Eisen laughed a bit because he had been completely expecting this question from the start. "Maybe so, yeah. Although I don't have any direct memories related to ever learning about it, I do still have this knowledge that keeps popping into my head." When he heard the explanation, Denmir crossed his arms and nodded. "I see, I guess that makes sense. Maybe you didn't get back your memories, but some of your knowledge anyway." "Seems so, yes. And I'm glad about that, truthfully. Without my knowledge, I would be completely lost, haha." Eisen began to laugh as he turned away and walked back to the brick box. Carefully, he took out the blade and the metal part of the hilt and placed them to the side to air cool, which happened in a mere 10 seconds because of the system. Eisen first grabbed the metal part of the hilt and heated the opening in the forge. Once it began turning slightly red, he slowly pushed it around the front of the wooden grip to burn into it, making sure it won't just slip off at some point. Then, he grabbed the sword at its blade and began heating the rod which would be inserted into the wood of the grip, and then slowly pushed the lightly glowing piece of steel into the opening he drilled beforehand. And then, after making sure everything was not perfectly joined together and wouldn't budge even if Aizen tried pulling them apart, he walked over to the grinding wheels again to finish the sword off. Beginning with the roughest wheel, he ground the edge to be sharper and sharper, then moving on to the next finest wheel to continue. After an hour, Aizen finished the sword completely, excited to see the results. For creating a magic, imbued weapon with overwhelming quality, you gain +1 STR and +1 WS, weak, mana imbued Zweihander, quality. Perfect, rank. 2. Description, an extremely high-quality sword created by the blacksmith Aizen. Since he imbued magic into it during the forging, its quality rose significantly, but due to the rank limit, even an overwhelming quality item has only a low amount of mana stayed in the final product. Effect, +5 STR, +5 END, +5 AGI, and as such, Aizen's first proper weapon was completed, and he could barely wait to use it for the first time. But before then, he would finally learn the next crafting skill, tailoring. Chapter 14 Tailoring. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Aizen. Where are we going now? With a broad smile on her face, Bree followed closely behind Aizen as he used a bridge suspended in the center of the spiraling town to walk over to the other spiral, where Denmir explained to him he could find the tailor. I am going to learn tailoring now. Are you going to help me out again? Aizen asked and looked down next to him at the pink-haired girl skipping around happily. Sure, she was older than she looked, maybe 18 or 19 years old, but he still couldn't help but treat her like a kid. The reason for that was pretty simple. She acted like a kid most of the time. She was nervous, fidgety, and acted a lot like his granddaughter who was barely 8 years old. Ooh. That's so cool. And I'd love to help you. She replied happily. After about 20 minutes of searching for the tailor, they come across a shop called Beautiful Clothes, a very straightforward, simple name. Aizen stepped through the door and was greeted by a bright, neatly sorted storefront. Opposite to the entrance was the front desk. To the left side after entering were male mannequins in different body types, one for humans or elves, one for dwarves, and one for beast-people, whereas the only real difference of the beast-person mannequin was the short tail sticking out the back and the basic round ears on top. On the other side of the room were female mannequins in the same body types. In the center of the room were a few tables where different accessory items were displayed, such as small bags or purses made of fabric, as well as a few different hats. There was a dwarven woman, who basically had the same build as any other dwarf Aizen had seen so far, just with a few more feminine features such as a thinner face and arms, sitting at the counter, drawing up different designs in a notebook. Ah, hello. How can I help you today? She asked when she saw Bree and Aizen enter, barely looking up from the notebook. Aizen stepped up directly in front of the counter and leaned down a bit. Hello there, young lady, I'm Aizen. I would like to learn tailoring from you. He explained simply with a light smile on his face. The dwarven woman turned her head upward, looking Aizen up and down. Aizen. Are you the one Belrim and Denmir told me about? Aizen began scratching his beard and closed his eyes, nodding and smiling. I'm sure I am, as long as there isn't a second Aizen in town, alright. But only because those two heavily recommended you. Come on, we'll do something easy to start off. By the way, I'm Falmira Brighthood. Nice to meet you. Falmira held her hand outward and Aizen shook it with a smile. It was only then that she noticed Bree standing behind him. Oh, and is that Bree? How are you? She asked with a bright smile. I'm great. I've been following Aizen around for the day and it's been super fun. Is that so? Well, then come along. She waved the both of them into the workshop in the back, where about a dozen women, the majority dwarven, but also with a few humans and elves mixed in, were busy sewing different items. Falmira brought Eisen and Bree over to an empty table and brought a pink piece of fabric over. For now, I want you to make a purse. It's simple, and should be enough to get you the tailoring skill. New quest. Tailor tutorial, description. After requesting Falmira Brighthood to teach you tailoring, she asked you to create a small pink purse. Reward, tailoring skill, experience, failure, lowered reputation with Falmira, time limit. None. Falmira then placed a roll of thin thread, a needle, and a pair of fabric scissors down in front of him. You can use those if you want. However, since Eisen already had the tools he needs, besides the string, he shook his head and took out the 2 storage boxes as well as the handle for the blades. I've got my own, actually. He laughed softly and received a smile from Falmira. Seems like you're well prepared, huh? Well, anyway. Here's how you have to cut it. Cut that shape twice, and then sew those halves together at the edge, but leave the top open. Then you only need to turn it inside out and add some thick string at the top so you can close it. If you need help with anything, just tell me, I'll be back out front. Falmira explained and Eisen nodded. Bree and Eisen sat down next to each other at the table and Eisen assembled his X-Acto knife. He opened the first box and grabbed one of the blades, then easily slipped it into the opening at the front of the handle and made sure it wouldn't slip out. He placed the paper form on top of the fabric and carefully cut around it, making sure there aren't any mistakes. After finishing the 2 teardrop-shaped pieces of fabric, he set down the blade next to him on the table, and opened his needle box, and grabbed one of the needles out of it. Eisen then took the end of the thread and carefully put it through the hole at the end of the needle, then tied a knot in the end. After pondering about it for a few seconds, he decided to use a basic running stitch to sew the pieces of fabric together. And then he remembered one of the skills he hasn't been using at all up until now. One of his racial skills, a dwarf's hands. He activated the skill simply by thinking about it and instantly felt his fingers become more nimble. Now fully prepared to do this, he turned back to the fabric. Since the top was supposed to stay open, Eisen began stitching at one side of the opening, and pushed the needle through the backside through both layers of fabric, then moved ahead a centimeter, and went back down through the fabric, moved another centimeter ahead and repeated the cycle until there was basically a frame all around the fabric, about 1 centimeter away from the edge. To make the stitch stronger, and since this really didn't take too long, he turned the stitching around to basically fill the gaps between the visible pieces of string, making it look like a continuous line. He then cut off the 2 ends of the string and tied them together tightly so that they wouldn't fall apart. As the second to last step, he turned the small pouch inside out, basically making the stitches invisible from the outside, and then grabbed a thicker piece of string, carefully trailing it around the opening in a manner similar to a running stitch, just with about 5 centimeters between each time the string was put through the fabric and without trailing it back to fill the gaps like before and cut the string off at the end. Lastly, he tied thick knots into each end of the string. You made a simple pink purse, quality. Perfect, rank 0, description, a simple purse made out of soft pink fabric. It's well made and robust. Ooh, so pretty. Bree exclaimed while looking at the finished item, and Eisen laughed softly. Yes, it really is, huh? The both of them stood up and went back to the storefront to show Falmira the finished product and complete the quest. Oh. Do you need help with anything? She asked when she saw Eisen and Bree step through the door to the workshop. Eisen shook his head and smiled, actually, I'm finished. Here's the purse. Falmira stared at the neatly sewed purse in front of her eyes, and then looked back at Eisen. Did you really do this? But you don't even have the tailoring skill yet. Haha, yeah, but I used my racial skill, so I guess that helped a bit. Eisen scratched his beard and closed his eyes while he explained, and Falmira sighed loudly, right, I forgot you're half-dwarf. That skill helped me out a bunch of times as well, especially in the beginning. But I have to say, even considering you used a dwarf's hands, this is really well made. Quest successful. Tailor tutorial, description. After requesting Falmira Brighthood to teach you tailoring, she asked you to create a small pink purse. Reward, tailoring skill, experience, failure, lowered reputation with Falmira, time limit. None, bonus, extra experience, rise in reputation with Falmira, unlimited access to workshop, you gained 500 experience, you are now level 7, tailoring skill learned. Eisen began to smile at the level up message and thought about what stats to use them on. Formilla held her hand to her chin and carefully observed the purse further, then looked up at Eisen to make him an offer. My stock in purses has gone down lately. If you feel like making some more for me, I'll pay you a little bit. It's an easy way to level your tailoring skill as well. How does 5 copper per purse sound? He began to think and scratched his beard. The only things he had planned was to make a bag and some clothes, but it would probably be a good idea to get his skill level a little bit higher before that. Thus, he nodded with a smile, that would be grand, thank you. How many do you need me to make? For now, 10 should be more than enough. At your speed, and since you should only get faster, for now at least, you should be able to finish it pretty quickly. New quest. Pure amass, description, Falmira Brighthood asked you to create 10 more purses for her shop. She will reimburse you for your work. Only an item with at least a rank of 0 and quality of above average will be accepted. Higher quality may give a bonus. Reward, 5 copper, 10 experience for every finished purse, failure, lowered reputation with Falmira, time limit. End of the day, alright, sounds good to me. What fabric should I use? Make 3 blue, 3 green, and 3 red. Those are sold most. The dwarven woman explained, and then for the last one, use any fabric you think looks good. Eisen nodded and turned around, walking back to the workshop with Bree, who looked up at him and asked, "Can I help you somehow?" He thought about it for a bit and then nodded, "Yes, actually. I'll show you the fabric I'm going to use, and it would be a great help if you can get 4 rolls of string that look like each of the colors the most." Happy that she can help Eisen, Bree smiled brightly and nodded, "Okay." They walked over to the far side of the room to a wall with huge rolls of different fabrics packed so tightly together that they couldn't see the brick wall behind it. After picking out the 3 colors Filmora specified, Eisen picked out a nice chrome white colored fabric for the last one. Once he showed those to Bree, she quickly ran off to get the string. He then cut off some sheets of the fabrics, enough to make the 10 purses, and then brought them over to his table where Bree was already waiting for him with the right string. "Thanks for the help, Bree." Eisen smiled and then sat down on a chair, preparing to craft the purses. Chapter 15 Backpack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Wait, you're already done? Falmira exclaimed in surprise as she looked down at the 10 purses laying in front of her. Usually it would have taken him considerably longer, but he put 10 of his 15 new stat points into agility, and divided the rest amongst every stat of his. Furrowing her brows, Falmira slowly inspected each one to make sure they're all up to par, and then leaned back in her chair and sighed out loud. "They're all perfect quality. Denmir was right, you're a genius." She closed her eyes and nodded, keeping her arms crossed. "Alright, here you go, you deserved it." She opened a bag lying underneath the counter and placed 80 copper coins on the table. Quest successful. Purses amass, description, Falmira Brighthood asked you to create 10 more purses for her shop. She will reimburse you for your work. Only an item with at least a rank of 0 and quality of above average will be accepted. Higher quality may give a bonus. Reward, 5 copper, 10 experience for every finished purse, failure, lowered reputation with Falmira, time limit. End of the day, bonus, 1 copper for every quality higher than above average per purse, higher reputation with Falmira. Eisen nodded and looked through the quest notification. And after thanking Falmira for the bonus money, he decided to finally ask something he should have tried to find out earlier. Falmira, I'm pretty curious, what are all possible qualities of an item? Surprised at this unexpected question, Falmira began to frown. What? You don't know? Didn't Denmir explain that to you? Seeing Eisen shake his head and Bree just tilt her head in confusion, Falmira sighed and began to explain. There's 8 different main qualities. Lowest, low, below average, average, above average, high, highest and perfect. That is what shows you the quality of an item within its rank, but know that no matter how high the quality of a rank 1 item is, it will never be better than the lowest quality rank 2 item. So a rank 1, perfect quality item will be worse than a rank 2, lowest quality item. Then, there are 2 more qualities. First, there are 11 ranks to everything. Items, skills, everything really. Rank 0 to rank 10. A rank 0 item with a quality below lowest has the unusable quality, and a rank 10 item with a quality above perfect has the divine quality. That's all you need to know about that, really. I see. Well, then I'm glad I've been getting the highest quality rating for my ranks all the time, haha. Eisen laughed loudly and scratched his beard. Well, if you're alright with it, I'd like to use your workshop for some personal projects of mine. Of course, I'll pay for all the materials and if you need me to do some work for you, I'll do it. Sure, go ahead. I'd love to see what you can do. The dwarven owner of the tailor shop nodded with excitement glittering in her eyes. Eisen thanked her, but also asked for some sketching supplies, such as pencils and paper. The reason he asked for those was that beside making a simple bag, he also wanted to start working on some different clothes he could change into. First, Eisen picked out a fabric he would like for his bag, all the while looking around at different kinds of fabrics to use for his clothes later. For his bag, he chose a nice black cotton, as well as another dark red one to mix together while making the bag. He chose those colors since he decided to go for this general theme in attire because of the black coin with red carvings in the shape of a hammer around his neck. After choosing string that fits with the colors of the bag, he continued on to his table. Eisen chose the black fabric as the base. He took the sketching paper he got from Falmira and began to draw out the outlines for the bag. He went for a basic rectangle shape with rounded edges, and just so slightly made one of the 2 short sides shorter than the other. After finishing the sketch, Eisen cut along the lines he drew to make the form. Then, he placed the form onto the fabric and cut it out twice in black, using his self-made X-Acto knife. He simply sewed them together using the same running stitch he used for the purses, since it's a reliable and durable one, and left out an opening at the shorter of the short sides. As the last step for the actual container part of the bag, he flipped over the edges of the opening and sewed them against the rest of the bag to reinforce the rim. After turning the bag inside out, he was happy to see that his tailoring skill ranked up to 1. Tailoring reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, it is now easier to penetrate fabrics, due to ranking. Up your tailoring skill, you gained +1 AGI and +1 END. With a smile Eisen began to sketch out the part which would become the lid of the bag, making it as wide as the opening and about double as long. Directly after sketching out the lid, Eisen drew a simple long thin rectangle which would become the form for the straps later. He cut out the forms off the paper and placed them onto the dark red fabric, tracing them to create cotton versions of them. He traced the one for the lid once, and the one for the straps 4 times. Eisen then simply sewed one of the lid sides onto one side of the opening and turned to the straps. He stood up and quickly got some light and fluffy wool to spread half of it on one of the long rectangles. After placing another one onto that rectangle, he sewed them together all around the edges, and repeated that process a second time using the other 2 rectangles of red cotton. He placed the straps onto the back side of the bag and pushed his needle through the 3 layers of cotton at one of the ends to sew them onto the bag. He sewed the top of the other strap onto the bag parallel to the first one, and then, slightly offset outward, sewed each of the bottom parts of the straps on. Eisen made sure to use the strongest string he could find and used the backstitch instead of the running stitch. While the running stitch he used up until now included simply continuously moving forward while leaving a certain space between every time he pushed the needle through the fabric, the backstitch basically works opposite to that in some regards. You start like with the normal running stitch and push your needle through the fabric, and push it back through to the top a stitch length away, and then return to the part you pushed your needle through the first time. For the second step, you continue forward a stitch length further away than when you first pushed the needle through the back forward, and move it backward to just that spot, using the same hole you made before to push through. Then you essentially just continue this second step until you're finished. This gives the stitch more strength and flexibility than other stitches, which is important especially if Eisen wants to carry heavy things in his backpack. As his finishing touch, Eisen grabbed a simple black button, cut a small slit into the end of the lid of the bag, and stitched the button onto the black cotton so that he can properly close it when he wants to. And with that, he placed his bag onto the table and looked at it happily. You made a red and black backpack, quality. Perfect, rank. 1, description, a relatively simple red and black backpack. Can store any type of item, and the weight limit is high due to the strength of fabric and stitch. The wool-filled straps make sure you don't get sore shoulders after wearing it for a while. Great. He smiled happily, although somewhat disappointed he didn't manage to break through his rank limit. He figured it made sense. He only got his tailoring to rank 1 in the middle of making it, after all. That's so pretty. Bree exclaimed with glittering eyes as she looked at the backpack in Eisen's eyes, while he began slowly putting his items inside. He smiled and placed his large hand on her head, sitting back down on his chair. Well, now that that's done, I've got some other things I want to make, which are clothing. There's one thing I've got in mind that I want to make, but how about you help me out with the designs for the other ones? And after that, we can even design something for you, if you want. You've helped me out a lot today, after all. Really, are you serious? You want to make something for me? Just for me? Bree muttered out confused, her cheerful demeanor completely gone. Eisen began to frown, and nodded. I mean, yes, why not? You've been watching me do all this boring stuff all day. And it's going to be a great practice to get my skill level up as well, so it's not like I don't get anything out of it. Bree nodded and wiped some tears out of her eyes. All right, thank you, Eisen. Nobody ever made something for me. After placing a hand on her back to comfort her a little bit, Eisen got out simple paper to draw designs on. He took a few minutes to quickly sketch out a rough shape of himself, quite similar to the mannequin he saw during character creation. Drawing skill learned. Oh. I didn't know there was something like that. Eisen said in surprise, and Bree looked at him confused. What do you mean, Eisen? Is anything wrong? He shook his head and explained that he just got a new skill from sketching out the base for the design. Immediately, Bree opened her eyes wide and looked back and forth from Eisen and his drawing. Wait, what? You just got the drawing skill. But it's so good already. How? She yelled out, getting a few looks from the other people in the workshop, but nothing more really. Eisen laughed and scratched his beard, his eyes closed. Well, I'm an old man, so how can I rely on skills? He winked and turned back to his sketch. All right, now tell me, what would be your ideas? I mainly want to go for relatively simple clothes that are easy to move in. What would you suggest? Eisen moved on to the topic at hand, and Bree pushed herself up on the table to get a better look at the paper. I like what you're wearing right now, but that's kind of boring, right? And you need lots of places to put your tools while you're working. I used to work as a carrier for an adventuring party before, and it was super boring to have to look through my whole backpack to look for the items they needed. Bree explained and Eisen nodded. That was a valid point. Especially once he would move around outside of town to fight against monsters, he would need a lot of things on hand. He was told by Moram that usually most adventurers always have healing and mana potions on hand, so having a lot of pockets would be helpful both in combat and work. Alright, so a simple base design, and a bunch of pockets on the pants, as well as something that makes the shirt not as boring. Got any ideas for that? I like the red and black you used for your backpack and the things you have on your necklace, so maybe something with that. Sounds good. How about something like this? Chapter 16 Designs. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Alright, we've got a few designs finished. I can only make some of them once I learn leatherworking though. Or at least some parts of them. Well, anyway, let's get to what you want. Eisen exclaimed while looking at the 5 designs in front of him. One of them was the casual work outfit with multiple pockets on the dark gray pants together with the black and red shirt. The next one they drew up was basically the same design, just with inverted colors, speak red where there was black and black where there was red and the same dark gray pants. The third design included a durable leather tunic, made of thin, flexible leather that made up the base and thick, strong leather placed around the chest and back in different places with gaps in between, still allowing freedom of movement. The pants for this outfit were of a similar concept, with the same thin flexible leather as a base, but a thick strong leather placed around to protect the most important body parts. The fourth was a simple thick leather apron together with baggy cloth pants, which would be useful for high-temperature work at the smithy, or wherever else Eisen may set up shop in the future. While the other 4 outfits were meant for work, 3 of them for crafting and 1 for hunting, the last one was an out-of-work outfit. Sure, most people may not see it like that, but to Eisen it was. Maybe it was an old man thing, maybe it was a thing only to Eisen, but he thought it was nice to walk around like that. The last outfit was a suit, a completely black suit, with a black shirt underneath, and a red tie. And besides the fact that Eisen thought it was a nice-looking outfit, he still thought it was kind of cool to walk around like a badass wearing such a suit. After looking the designs over once more, he placed them to the side and then faced Bree. Now, let's get to your outfit. What would you like to have? Bree immediately squinted her eyes and looked up at Eisen, something cute. I figured that, Bree. So how about a dress? Eisen suggested, and Bree nodded furiously. Yes. A dress, please. That would be so cute. Eisen laughed and drew up the basic form of Bree to layer the dress onto in the sketch. He decided to have its length be up until the halfway point on her thighs, be tight. Fitting around the chest area. For the colors, he decided to mix together an intense dark green as the base with the pink color of her hair to add cute details. Since fays, or fairies, are supposed to be quite connected to nature, Eisen decided to draw pink flowers onto the green of the dress. Do you like it? He turned to Bree and asked with a smile. She immediately nodded her head and smiled brightly, yes. Yes, that's super cute. Thank you so much. It's fine, really. So, I think for today that's about all the time we have. We should probably get back to the inn, or well, you should get back to wherever you live. Eisen suggested and packed up all his tools, as well as the paper he used to draw the sketches. Well, I also live at the inn. Instead of getting paid, they let me stay at the inn and eat for free. That's super nice, right? She explained and followed behind Eisen while he left the workshop. Yeah, that really is nice. But do you want to live there for the rest of your life? Don't you want to move into your own house at some point? I mean. Yeah, but. With her face turned away, she slowly began fidgeting with her fingers. I want to do some things first. Like, find my mother, and stuff. Eisen began to frown and looked down at Bree. If she really didn't even know her own mother, it would make sense to try and find her. So why are you here, then? Is your mother around here somewhere? She shook her head and looked down on the ground as the two of them began crossing the bridge over to the street where the inn was located. No. I don't think so, at least. I told you about being the carrier for an adventuring party, right? Well, they wanted to cross the mountain range. And on the first day, they found a cave not too far from here. There was a lot of treasure there. A lot of treasure. They told me to grab as much of it as I can carry, but my strength wasn't enough to carry as much as they wanted me to, so they stole my bag and carried it themselves. They threw me out of the cave and I found my way here. I don't know what happened to them, though. But well, I was here without any money or food or anything, but then I met the nice owner of the inn and he told me he would let me stay there for free if I helped out a little bit. Well, that's really nice of him. He did seem like quite a good guy. Eisen nodded and began scratching his beard with his eyes closed. After another few minutes that they spent walking without talking, they reached the inn. Eisen and Bree walked to the restaurant together to eat, and a waitress came up. "Hey, Bree. How are you? Haven't seen you around all day," she said with a smile, one that most might see as genuine. But Eisen could tell from his expansive life experience that this kind of smile was anything else but genuine, and held deep hatred and spite behind it. Bree looked down at the table and avoided eye contact, only further supporting what Eisen thought. Yeah, I was staying with Eisen all day." "Ooh. So you've finally done it and sold yourself to some lonely old man. But I thought you'd be like that, so." The waitress laughed with her hand in front of her mouth, looking down onto Bree who was still keeping her head low. When Eisen stood up looked at the young human woman. "Listen here, young woman. You should probably leave. Right now," he said, looking down at her with a calm face, the same one he had back when he was talking to Hendrik. The waitress stumbled back a little bit, but then only began to laugh more. "Oh. What's this? Did you go senile? This girl isn't a person, old man, so there's no need to get angry because of her. I warned you. And I don't give second chances." Eisen grumbled and leaned forward. Before the woman could even react, he picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. Hey, what's this supposed to mean? This is assault." She yelled out and began punching Eisen in the back to make him let go. Without any words, he walked to the front desk of the inn and looked at the innkeeper, who simply sighed and frowned when she saw the whole scene. "Tanya, what did I tell ya, 'bout insultin', Bree? What, that's all you have to say about this?" She yelled while Eisen slowly put her back down, her face completely flushed red. The innkeeper crossed his arms and nodded. It sure is, Tanya. Get in the back and change into your normal clothes. Ye don't work air anymore." Wait, what do you mean? Because of that bitch. She isn't even a person, so why? Fine, I changed my mind. The innkeeper interrupted her, and the girl grew a smug smile as if she was about to say something even more insulting toward Bree, but before she could open her mouth he continued talking. "Get the fuck outta here, and don't ever come back. Right this second, ye gear." The innkeeper said angrily, and seeing that he's serious, the girl, Tanya, angrily stomped out the front door, her face as red as a tomato. Eisen smiled and looked back at the innkeeper. "Sorry if I caused trouble. Right now and this morning as well, of course." With a smile on his face, showing his straight white teeth, the innkeeper shook his head. "Don'tcha worry 'bout it. Wanted to fire her anyway, Tanya's a bitch. Ye just gave me a good opportunity to fire her right now. She was super stuck up and kept insulting non-human customers. Which is 90% of our customers, considering this is a dwarven town. If that's so, then I guess you're welcome, haha. But I will get back to Bree now." Eisen laughed lowly and turned back around to head to the restaurant while the innkeeper began to smile. After that, Eisen and Bree had a lot of fun talking while they were eating, and Eisen found out some more things about Bree. She grew up with her father, a simple human, who fell in love with a nature fae, a pixie, Bree's mother. Eisen didn't care to ask how the whole ordeal worked, due to the obvious size difference, and instead smiled at the thought of two people giving up their cultural differences to be with each other. Truly, it did remind him a little bit of his late wife, who he had met during his time in Japan. But Bree's father died while she was barely 10 years old, leaving her to fend on her own in a world filled with people that hated her very existence. She struggled hard and did small jobs here and there to pay for food while living on the streets of her hometown until she found that she was good at support magic and had an extraordinary mana pool, which is when she became an adventurer who would do small tasks. With the help of her support magic, she was able to learn spells such as Lighten, which, how the name implied, lightened the weight of her gathered items to a certain amount. And by completing more and more simple gathering requests, she ranked up and got the attention of some higher-ranked parties that were famous in the area, and was scouted as their carrier, to basically bring the heaps of loot they would gather at times back to the guild to sell. But she was really only seen as a packing mule, and not for her support magic. For that, most parties had clerics or shamans, and Bree was always left behind once the party gathered enough money to buy spatial storage items, because that meant they didn't have to share the money from quests with one more person. After this whole cycle continued for years on end, she decided to only be a temporary hire for parties that went out to quests where they expected a high amount of loot. More and more she got to know the area around her hometown, and then she was hired by the party that simply left her behind. And now she spent all her time talking to people she could meet in the inn, hoping an adventurer would come along that could help her at least get back to a larger town. He heard her story, and Eisen leaned into his chair, scratching his beard and closing his eyes with a smile. Then how about I help you out? Well, it would need to wait for a month, because I have some business to attend to near here then, but after that, I do want to go on a journey. Well, we can help each other out, I guess. Having support like yours when fighting definitely seems useful. Not to speak of the help you were with my mana while smithing. Why don't you really want my help? Of course I do. He laughs out loud and looks at the girl that is nearly in tears in front of him. Then, only in a month. Could I maybe help you before then? It's really fun watching you work. Sure. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Eisen asked and smiled, and when Bree nodded furiously, he waved for the waitress so that he could pay, and then stood up, walking to his room to practice his mana manipulation a bit more. Chapter 17 Handyman. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen sat down on his bed and grabbed the book to train mana manipulation with out of his new backpack, which he then leaned against his nightstand. Flipping open the book, he skipped forward to Chapter 4, which concentrated on how to control mana when it is outside one's body. He already figured out how to compress it inside of his body and push it out through his skin to let it float over his palm, as well as layer it at the front of his hammer. And he managed to somewhat control the mana outside of his body as well, when he let it somewhat beat in the rhythm of his heartbeat. But this time around, he was supposed to do something else with his mana. The basic exercise in the book basically just told him to change the shape of the sphere later. At first maybe change it into a cube, but at some point also more complicated shapes like general items one had laying around. Eisen started out with the basics, slowly compressing it down and then moving it to his hand to push it slowly through the skin on his palm. When he felt the slight stinging, he opened his eyes and looked at the sphere on top of his hand. Right now it really was only a rough sphere shape, something one might expect to see when a bright light shines outward from a single point to create the illusion of a bigger sphere, and Eisen knew that a lot more mana than necessary was lost every single second. So the first thing he wanted to do was change that. He knew that there was something solid in the core of the sphere, so he only had to copy the feeling of the weird solid energy and replicate it throughout the whole sphere. Little by little, the core grew and the shine shrank as Eisen imagined the energy growing harder, round and flat like a glass bead. Eisen slowly used his left hand to touch the solid sphere of mana, and immediately felt how cold it was to his touch, but the more he felt it, the more the cold felt like heat, and the heat felt like the cold. It was a curious and unknown feeling to Eisen, but the more he felt it the more he wanted to feel it. He began to try and change its shape slowly, but it just wouldn't turn into the cube that Eisen wanted. There were only 6 small, flat surfaces that formed along the sphere, but not enough to actually call it a cube, or even have it be recognized as such by a third person. More and more, Eisen tried to refine the shape, but hit a counter. Stop at some point. No matter what he tried, it wouldn't change anymore. So to at least level his mana manipulation skill up a bit, he began changing the shape from the Mach. Cube into the sphere and back, repeating this cycle continuously until mana manipulation reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1. It is now easier to manipulate the shape of mana, due to ranking. Up your mana manipulation skill, you gained +1 INT and +1 WS. Immediately Aizen felt a major difference to before. The mana that could not be turned into a cube no matter how much he tried, took on the form he willed it to, as if poured into a mold. That's more like it. Aizen laughed out loud and looked at the cube. He held out his left hand and slowly touched the tip of his index finger against the corner of the mana. Cube. Seeing that it was surprisingly sharp, but still gave in to his touch, he smiled and continued reading on further. However, even before he could finish the first page, he read the warning that from then on it would only be useful with a rank of 2 or higher in mana manipulation, since the rest of the book had to do about manipulation of element-infused mana, and this was only unlocked when one reached rank 2. Thus, Aizen chose to rather train his mana manipulation ability for the time being. Since what he did last night even gave him extra wisdom, Aizen decided to continue on this train of thought. He only somewhat knew what a human heart looked like, since he could guess it from seeing animal hearts on the rare occasions that he cooked it in the past. However, since he wanted to take this chance and copy the shape of his heart as detailed as possible, he tried out something new. While keeping the shape of the mana. Cube floating over his hand up, he moved the rest of his mana still left inside of his body into the center of his chest. He concentrated on it especially, and felt his insides through the mana. It was a weird sensation, one he wouldn't be able to explain even if someone asked him to, but he knew how to control it. Aizen spread his mana out around his heart until it was completely covered and he could feel every last bit of it. Slowly, from the bottom up, Aizen copied exactly what he felt inside of him onto the cube floating over his palm. The longer Aizen tried shaping the cube, the more it looked like a heart. He continued inspecting his own heart while it beat, and copied that same tact onto the mana. Heart in front of him. Mana copy skill learned, mana copy library expanded, giant, dwarf heart, That's a skill. Awesome. Aizen exclaimed and looked at the notification floating next to the beating heart suspended in mid-air above his hand. He leaned in and looked at the pure white construct shining and glittering in the moonlight. This is truly beautiful. I'm not sure of the uses it might have, beside artistic ones, that is. He muttered out and placed his fingers around the heart, feeling it beat in his hand. That's when he had an idea. During his long life, he many times thought about how great it would be if he had more than 2 hands. With a grin on his face, Aizen moved the rest of his mana back into his hand, filling it out completely from the inside. He felt its shape and Aizen's new mana copy skill immediately went to work when he tried to copy the shape he felt, and the heart morphed into a hand. Mana copy library expanded, giant, dwarf hand. Wow, that's amazing. It really looks just like my hand. He exclaimed with glee in his voice, forgetting that the mana was still inside of his hand and the shape was being copied onto the structure in front of him. When he moved his hand closer, the mana hand moved away, and when he clenched it, so did the mana hand clench itself. Grinning, Aizen stretched his hand out forward, and the mana version of it traveled to the other side of the room, and when Aizen pulled his hand backward, it moved back toward himself. Slowly, trying to grasp the complex control it took, he moved the fake hand to his backpack, and closed it around the straps. When Aizen then held his hand upward, the backpack basically began to float with the help of the mana hand. Mana hand skill learned, Another new skill. And this one definitely seems useful. Aizen laughed out loud and let go of the bag, then scratched his beard while the hand copied that motion. As if he had an idea, and simply to test out how the activation worked, Aizen concentrated on his other hand and filled it with mana. It was relatively hard to split the mana left in his body up, but the moment he got the mana hand skill, the energy contained in his hand felt stationary, as if he was wearing a glove inside of his hand, so he didn't need to worry about concentrating to keep it there. The moment his mana filled his other hand in addition to the already filled one, a second hand appeared in front of him. Slowly but surely, he picked up the book he laid down on the nightstand and opened it up with his mana hands, carefully flipping through the pages. His control really was not good in the slightest, which could be seen in him ripping out multiple pages out of the book. Luckily, it was the guide book for the basics of the game instead of the mana manipulation book. Aizen had to return that to Moram at some point, after all. For the next hour, Aizen continued practicing with his mana hands by using the ripped out pages and folding them into different shapes. At first, he could only fold it in half a few times, but later he was even able to fold simple origami animals out of it. During his practice, he noticed a few things. The further away his hands were, the worse his fine control got. And then, without Aizen expecting it, something happened. Your MP hit 0. You will lose consciousness now. The next morning, Aizen woke back up with his MP completely filled up again. He shot up immediately, his eyes opened and he looked around confused. What just happened? He muttered out, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. It said I ran out of MP, huh? Well, at least I know that's what's going to happen when I run out, so I should be careful so that it doesn't happen outside. Yawning loudly, Aizen stood up and picked up the book lying on the floor, as well as the random folded pieces of paper spread out everywhere. Well, I'll just go get some breakfast then. And maybe I can ask Bree to help me practice. With her giving me mana, I should be able to level it up further. He smiled and left his room, his backpack under his arm. Good morning, Aizen. Bree exclaimed happily when she saw him enter the restaurant. Aizen smiled softly and sat down at one of the nearby tables. Good morning, Bree. Working in the morning again, huh? Yup. I asked if I can work the super early morning shifts. I don't need to sleep as much as others because I'm a Fei-kin. She smiled and then took Aizen's breakfast order. Since Bree planned it so that he would be the last customer she served that morning, she came back with 2 plates instead of 1 and sat down together with Aizen to eat. Aizen explained his plans for today, which would be to simply work on his and her clothes, at least the ones he could make without leather. And if there was still time, he would try and make something simple, like another purse, only using his mana hands. Whoa! You can use mana hands. But it took me super long to learn that. Bree yelled out in disbelief, crossing her arms with a pout on her face. With a laugh, Aizen finished his breakfast at about the same time as Bree did, and handed her the money, and obviously a generous tip, which she quickly denied, but since Aizen insisted, she took it against her will. After a few minutes, Bree came out from the back and skipped to Aizen's side. He smiled and walked out of the inn with Bree directly behind him. The two of them took their time strolling around town, Bree showing Aizen some of her favorite places and telling him more about the town. The pair then walked across the same bridge as the day before, and made their way toward the tailor shop Beautiful Clothes to begin work for the day. Chapter 18 Clothes Make the Man. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Aizen and Bree entered through the front door and were greeted by a cheerful Falmira. Good morning, you two. Any plans for today? She asked with a curious smile as she looked at the two of them. Good morning, Falmira. I just want to try and make some clothes today, and Bree's gonna help out a bit. Aizen replied with a smile. Falmira nodded and waved them to the back. Aizen and Bree sat down at an empty table, and Aizen placed his backpack down, grabbing the design papers. Alright, I think I'll do the regular crafting outfits first. Wanna help me get the thread again? Aizen asked and stood up, while Bree nodded furiously. Yees. The two of them walked to the wall filled with different fabrics, and Aizen went through different types of cotton, which he thought to be the best material to make clothes out of for now. He picked red and black cotton, the same colors as he used for his backpack, and a light gray cotton to use for the pants. Immediately after showing her the colors, Bree ran off to get the right rolls of thread, while Eisen brought the fabric over to their table. While Bree was still getting the thread, Eisen began getting his tools ready, his X-Acto knife as well as his needles, and used tool connection on them. Eisen probably wouldn't be able to get them up to as high a connectivity rating as he would with his hammer at some point, since these are basically throwaway items, but he still wanted to get as many bonuses out of them as possible. Eisen wanted to get to work, and luckily he already knew his proportions, so that was one step off the list. One of the few things he was still able to do after his injury was to sew, albeit not as quickly or as much as he would have liked, but it was better than nothing, so he spent a lot of time making different clothes for himself and his family in the abundant free time he suddenly had. He grabbed a large piece of design paper and sketched out the shape he would need to cut out later for the shirt. Carefully measuring the width and adding some extra centimeters so that it wouldn't be a skin-tight fit, he was soon finished and cut it out along the edges. He laid it down on the red fabric first, and cut the shape out twice, then repeated the same for the black fabric, and then cut off each part designated for his sleeves. Next, he drew out a large oval, and cut it in half length-wise, as well as a slightly bigger oval and did the same. He laid the smaller down on each side of each shirt base and cut them out of it, so that he basically had 2 red and 2 black ovals, and cut out larger half ovals out of unused fabric. After that, he drew and cut out a long small rectangular strip on paper, and cut out both a black and red version of them off a new piece of cotton. He followed this by cutting out 2 thinner strips of both black and red each. And as the last pieces of the shirt, he cut out 4 circles out of the smaller half ovals, 2 red and 2 black. Out of each circle, he then cut out another slightly smaller circle, out of which he in return cut out small hammers. This would later be put together as patches for each shoulder part of the shirts. Eisen smiled at Bree and took the thread from her. He put the black thread through the needle's hole and slowly began infusing his mana into the small piece of metal, which would then in return fill the thread itself with his mana. First, he began assembling the shirt with the black base. He grabbed the first black shirt half base as well as one of the larger red half ovals and placed it into the spot where he cut out one of the smaller black half ovals. Eisen pushed his needle through the red fabric and into the black and used a strong backstitch to sew them together. He repeated this same thing 3 more times, once more on the other side of the same shirt half, and then twice on each side of the other shirt half. Next, Eisen laid the 2 halves on top of each other and used more backstitches to run across its edge, leaving out the holes for his waist, arms, and neck. He connected each of the sleeve parts that belonged together with each other, and then simply sewed them onto the shirt. After he was done, he slightly pulled on each half to test its strength and observe any mistakes or flaws, and after not seeing anything, turned the shirt inside out. First, however, he turned to Bree and asked her to start giving him some of her mana, since he was slowly running low. Eisen was sure he would have been able to finish the shirt with the mana he had remaining, but since he got more tired the lower his mana ran, he wanted to fill it back up so that he wouldn't make any mistakes just because he got a bit groggy. "Thanks, Bree. That woke me right up." He laughed loudly and placed his hand on Bree's head, then quickly returned to his work. Eisen placed one of the small red strips on the end of one of the sleeves, and quickly sewed the strip onto it, repeating the same on the other side, and cutting off the excess of the strip. Next, Eisen got the collar of the shirt. Out of the front, he cut a small triangle to make the shirt a V-neck, and placed one end of the bigger red strip at the lowest point of the open neck, and slowly began sewing it all around to give the collar a border. "It looks so great!" Bree exclaimed with big eyes, and Eisen replied with a soft laugh. I'm not done just yet. There's still the finishing touch left." Smiling, Eisen placed one of the bigger red circles onto one of the shoulder parts, simply sewing it on with his regular backstitch, then placed a black circle into its cut-out center, sewing it on as well. Lastly, he placed the red hammer into the opening, pushing his needle through the cotton to fix it on his shirt, and repeated the same process on the other side. Filled with pride, he placed the shirt down on the table and crossed his arms, a big smile forming as he nodded. "Done. You made a black and red shirt, quality. Perfect, rank. 2. Description, an extremely high quality black and red shirt made by the tailor Eisen. Due to his great abilities, he overcame the limit of his skills and reached a higher rank than normally possible, and even then perfected it. The seams are nearly invisible, and the type of stitch used leads to high durability. On its shoulder, it holds a red hammer on a black background, a sign of the original of the mechanical arts. It was made with the intention of being worn during crafting. Effect, +5 AGI, +5 END, for creating an item of overwhelming quality, you gained +1 AGI and +1 END, you overcame the limits of your skills. You have broken through the limits of 2 different skills. Limit Breaker title is changing to Limit Breaker 2, title. Limit Breaker 2, description, by breaking the limits of 2 of your skills, you showed the world you stand above it. Effect, +2 to all basic stats. Already completely overwhelmed by the notifications he got, he was immediately happy when he saw that he broke through his tailoring skills rank, and was just utterly surprised at his next notifications. For using them to create a great item, your hands are pleased. Extra proficiency to a dwarf's hands skill. A dwarf's hands reached level 100 in rank 0, upgrading to rank 1, your hands grow more dexterous at all times. Due to ranking. Up your dwarf's hands skill, you gained +1 AGI and +1 END, oh. Perfect. Eisen laughed and leaned back in his chair, his mouth turned upward into a bright smile. Bree leaned over the table and took a good look, her eyes glittering with joy. It looks super awesome. So you'll do the second one now too? She asked curiously, and Eisen nodded. Making this shirt took him about 3 hours, and since he only needed to sew the parts together with the second shirt, it might take only about 2 to 2.5 hours. To take advantage of the bonuses from his newly crafted shirt, he took off the old one he was wearing. Immediately, Bree turned away with a blush, but Eisen tried to ignore it while he put on his new shirt. He sighed out loud and began scratching his beard with his eyes closed, nodding slightly. That's more like it. That thing was getting pretty uncomfortable. Eisen muttered out and set his old shirt aside, then looked forward at the materials in front of him. Alright, Bree, I'll tell you if I need any more mana. He said enthusiastically and immediately got to work. You made a red and black shirt, quality. Perfect, rank. 2. Description, an extremely high quality red and black shirt made by the tailor Eisen. Due to his great abilities, he overcame the limit of his skills and reached a higher rank than normally possible, and even then perfected it. The seams are nearly invisible, and the type of stitch used leads to high durability. On its shoulder, it holds a red hammer on a black background, a sign of the original of the mechanical arts. It was made with the intention of being worn during crafting. Effect, +5 AGI, +5 END, for creating an item of overwhelming quality, you gain +1 AGI, great. Second shirt, complete. Now I finally have something else to wear every once in a while. Eisen said happily and folded the shirt before setting it to the side. And what next? Bree asked and looked up at Eisen. He turned to her and thought for a bit, then said, I think now I'm going to make the pair of pants. I don't think it's necessary to make more than one pair that looks exactly the same, so I should be done with 2 out of the 5 outfits today. Cool. And then what will you do tomorrow? The Fey-kin girl tilted her head curiously. Tomorrow. I need to make the other pair of pants for my blacksmithing outfit and then start on my suit. If I get that done quickly enough, I'll have the whole day after tomorrow to make your dress. And then I think I'll move on to leatherworking. Ooh, you're going to take that much time to make my dress? Yeah. It needs to be good, after all. Don't worry, no matter what you make will be good. Bree muttered out with her face flushed red. Eisen smiled and turned forward, feeling enthusiastic to finish the pair of pants. He grabbed a sheet of design paper and drew out the shape he would need to cut out later 4 times to make the pants, as well as multiple different dot-sized squares as the base for the extra pockets, and an oval shape for the bag inside the regular front and back pockets. Using his X-Acto knife, Eisen cut the forms out and placed the pant base onto the light gray cotton, cutting the shape out carefully. While he was at it, he cut out enough squares for 6 big pockets and 3 small pockets, and 4 of the ovals. Very simply, Eisen placed 2 of the pant quarters on the other and sewed them together for the left side, and repeated the same process for the right side. After that, he carefully set the left and right sides together, making sure there is enough space in the crotch, but in the front didn't fully sew both halves together. Slowly but surely, he pushes his needle up and down, forward and backward, until the 2 halves became one. He turned the pants inside out and added a few holes at the fly so that he can open and close them easily once he added buttons. Next, he folded a few centimeters of the waistband forward and sewed it on to add strength to it. Once that was done, Eisen cut 4 horizontal slits into the front and back, and added the oval on the inside for the regular front and back pockets. The last parts would now be the extra pockets. He grabbed the cotton squares he cut out and created 3 small cloth boxes, as well as 6 bigger versions. The top and back were both still open when Eisen started to sew them onto the pants, giving him 3 small pockets along his waistband, and then 3 on each of his legs. At last, he would only need to add the lids to them. Eisen cut out 3 small and 6 big trapezes using red cotton, and cut a small slit near the smaller sides, and carefully sewed them above the open top pockets. At last, Eisen grabbed a few black buttons and sewed them on where they were needed, meaning his fly and the pocket lids. Eisen sighed out loud and stood up, stretching carefully. He had been sitting down slightly hunched all day, and even if he technically didn't feel too uncomfortable, this action was just a habit after finishing a day of work. He looked at the pair of pants and smiled. "You made a pair of gray pants, quality. Perfect, rank. 2, description, an extremely high-quality pair of gray pants made by the tailor Eisen. Due to his great abilities, he overcame the limit of his skills and reached a higher rank than normally possible, and even then perfected it. The seams are nearly invisible, and the type of stitch used leads to high durability. There are many pockets on the outside to store different smaller items, such as different tools or materials. Effect, +5 AGI, +5 END, for creating an item of overwhelming quality, you gain +1 END. Chapter 19 Reunion. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eisen leaned back in his chair and sighed out loud. Finished. He smiled and folded the pants and laid them onto the red and black shirt. Bree looked up at Eisen and tilted her head, "Are you going to work on the next outfit as well now?" "I don't think so, no. I wanted to try crafting something with my mana hands, remember. I just want to see if it has any effect on the item and if it will help with the skill proficiency." "Ooh, right. Do that, I want to see you make something with them." Bree replied excitedly and got a soft smile from Eisen in return. "Of course." Eisen closed his eyes and began compressing his mana. After he formed it into a sphere, he slowly split it into 2 halves, moving one of them to his right and the other to his left hand. He let the mana spread out into each of his hands, and soon enough Eisen noticed he could let his concentration go since the mana hand skill activated. In front of Eisen, there now were 2 snow-white hands that gave off a light glow. "Ooh. So pretty." Bree muttered out, causing Eisen to simply laugh. Eisen took a deep breath and closed his eyes, then stood up and walked back a few steps so that he wouldn't get in his own hand's way. Carefully, Eisen moved his right mana hand to the X-Acto knife and slowly picked it up. With his other mana hand, he then picked up the template for the purses and pushed it down onto some of the red fabric still on the table, and cut out the teardrop shape twice. Next, Eisen grabbed the end of the remaining thread and put it through one of his needle's holes before trying to tie a knot into it so it wouldn't slip out. Up until then, Aizen was able to prepare everything like normal, but something like tying a knot into the thread was harder than Aizen expected, and he was only able to tie it after trying for a solid minute. This might be harder than I thought. I'm not sure if my mana hands are nimble enough to sew the purse. Or maybe. Suddenly, Aizen got an idea, but didn't know whether or not it would work. He concentrated on activating his racial skill, a dwarf's hands, and immediately felt and saw a change in the mana hands. The biggest visual change was that something like a thin thread of mana grew between his actual hands and the mana hands. Aizen felt his mana slowly draining immediately after this happened, as if he was fueling the movement of his mana hands. When he moved his hands again, he could see that the mana copies moved basically instantaneously. With a grin on his face, Aizen began to sew the two halves together before the time he could use his skill ran out. It was a lot harder than one might expect, considering that the mana hands did the exact same thing as Aizen's normal ones. But while they acted the same as Aizen's hands, there was one big difference. He couldn't feel what he was doing. He couldn't feel the cold metal of the needle, nor the fabric along his fingers as he held it down. These were all important details, and since Aizen always had these sensations all his life, it was hard to get used to not having them. However, since this wasn't that hard of a hurdle to overcome, Aizen still managed to finish the purse within the half-hour that he had, albeit barely. You made a simple red purse, quality. High, rank. 1. Description: a simple red purse made with special means, as it was made with hands made of pure mana. This act alone took an immense amount of control. Not overwhelming, but still surprisingly good, Aizen muttered out and nodded his head, then turned over to Bree, who was looking at him with big eyes, and he laughed lowly and handed the purse over to her. Here you go. It's not a dress, but at least it's better than nothing. Bree's eyes opened up wider as she took the purse into her hands. Really, thank you so much, Aizen. No problem, Bree. But I think for today, let's head back to the inn. I'm feeling pretty tired after using so much mana. That was only an excuse, of course. Aizen wanted to get back to the inn as early as possible so that he could log off the game for a few hours to eat something and take a shower. And maybe Melody called again and he would have to deal with that and calm her down. It would also be a good idea to call Tony or Natsuo and see how they're doing. After cleaning up the table, Aizen grabbed his new pants and shirt, as well as his old shirt, and slung his backpack over his shoulder, before Aizen and Bree left the workshop. When Falmira turned at the sound of the opening door, she narrowed her eyes and leaned forward. You were wearing something else when you came in here, right? She asked and carefully inspected the shirt Aizen was wearing from a distance. He laughed and scratched his beard while replying, yes, how I said my plans for the day were to make some clothes. I'll be doing that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow as well, He held up the red and black shirt he was holding to show it to Falmira, and she happily took a look at it. She ripped open her eyes and looked back and forth from Aizen and the shirt repeatedly, before starting to stutter. What is this? Your skill rank, D. Don't tell me it's still 1. Denmir mentioned you broke through your blacksmithing skill, but to think you did the same for your tailoring skill. I don't believe I can somehow convince you to become a tailor. It is possible to change your occupation to tailor. Do you accept? Aizen carefully read through the notification before shaking his head. Sorry, I'm sure Denmir told you already, but I don't want to make such a choice yet. I understand. But if you change your mind, the option will always be there. Just come to me, and I will instantly give the occupation to you. Thank you, Falmira. We'll see you tomorrow then. Smiling, Aizen left the shop with Bree directly behind him. The two of them made their way to the inn, ate dinner together, and said goodnight before Aizen paid for a room. He walked through the door and immediately set down his things, taking off his shirt before lying down in bed. Fucking shit. I'm so old. Benjamin swore as he stood up from the capsule and held his back while stumbling across the room. His joints cracked as he was walking to the kitchen to make himself some food. It wasn't anything grand, just simply some buttered toast. He didn't really have that much of an appetite lately, besides when he was in the game, of course. After he finished his small breakfast, he went over to his phone and sat down on his couch. "Ah, hey Dad. How are you, Katie? Leave your brother alone and eat your waffles." "Sorry, I'm a little stressed." "What?" "Katie, I just said leave your brother alone." "No, stop. Stop biting him." Tony, Benjamin's youngest son, was the first one that was called. He seemed to be tired and annoyed, yelling over to his youngest daughter while talking to his father. Benjamin couldn't help but let out a soft chuckle. "Are you busy? Because if you are, we can talk another time. I just wanted to chat a bit anyway." No, it's fine, Dad. How are you?" "Benji keeps telling me to ask you how that game is." "What was it again?" "World of something or another." "World of Magic, yes, son. And it is truly a lot of fun. You know how I Jesus flipping Christ, Katie. If you don't stop biting Sean, I'll get the muzzle." "Sorry, Dad, what were you saying?" Tony apologized, trying to get his kids under control. "Are you really alright? If you need some time to yourself, you can come visit with the kids for a bit. That's been a long time coming anyway," Benjamin suggested, worried about his son. It hasn't been long since Jennifer, Tony's wife, passed away, and Benjamin so much knows the feeling of having to raise 3 children on his own. "Thanks, Dad. I'll have to see how much time I have left before I need to get back to work. I can't afford to." "Tony, I told you 1,000 times, if you need money, I'll lend you some. I really don't need it. I'm old, my house is paid off, and diapers for old men aren't as expensive as they used to be." Benjamin stayed quiet for a few seconds, waiting for the reply he wanted to hear. And when Tony finally laughed, Benjamin calmed down again. "Thanks, although I'll never get your humor. I'll see if we can come sometime this or next month. Should I tell Melody and Natsuo as well? So we could throw a little family reunion?" he asked, and Benjamin leaned back to think. "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It's been a while since we've all been together. I'll call Natsuo myself, I wanted to talk to him as well. Melody already called me a few times yesterday and completely freaked out." "Yeah, I know, she called me as well to see if I heard anything." "Well, I really have to go now before Katie officially becomes a cannibal. Love you, Dad. Love you too, son." Happy that he could help his son out a little bit in such a hard time of his life, Benjamin smiled. Next, he dialed the phone number of his oldest son, Natsuo. "Good morning, Natsuo. How are you?" he asked, excited to hear what else his son created since the last time they talked. While Melody chose to work as a teacher and Tony became a software engineer, Natsuo took after his father and decided to create things. He became an engineer specialized in robotics and kept fiddling with different things to create interesting inventions that Benjamin always loved to hear about. "Good morning, Dad. I meant to call you, actually. Melody was freaking out about something yesterday. I knew you were playing the game, so I wasn't too worried, but that reminded me to ask you about how the game feels. Some of my colleagues kept speculating on whether this is all just a sham to pull research money out of rich guys. If this technology really works, you have no idea what that's going to mean. Just imagine prosthetics that are indistinguishable from a real limb after they are placed on the patient. Blind people who will be able to see again by giving them prosthetic eyes. Haha, I'm glad you're so enthusiastic about this. Once the game is accessible to the public, you should also consider playing," Benjamin suggested, and immediately Natsuo answered, "Yes. I definitely will. You'll have to show me the ropes then." He laughed out and Benjamin smiled. Well, anyway, do you have any big projects coming up? Because Tony and I were just talking, and we figured it would be a good idea to come over here with the kids for a while, and he suggested that you all also come by. To have a little family reunion. Slowly, Benjamin explained the situation and instantly Natsuo agreed. Oh yeah, definitely. It's been a while since I've seen Tony and Melody as well. And I'm sure Lola and Lila are also going to be happy to see their cousins. And Christy will be ecstatic that she can relax a bit as well. Is there a date yet? No, not yet, I'll keep you updated though. And talking about Christy, greet her from me. Will do. But sorry, gotta go Dad. A colleague needs my help with something. Talk to you later, love you. Love you too, Natsuo.